I had to get away. As a passenger looking out the window, life was sort of dragging along its own routine. Declining an early lunch greeting to the most Instagrammable bistro in my city, I chose rather to escape town for some time. I wasn't feeling it of late, yet fortunately I had a sensible fix. With a long end of the week in front of me, I felt that booking a lodge in the forest may be exactly what I wanted. I needed to get into nature before it was excessively cold, and perhaps get in some climbing. I wanted to be able to get away from the internet, read a book, or listen to music while sitting by a big fire. I figured that could cause me to feel like an individual once more. I was doing some quests to a great extent, and at last tracked down the ideal spot. It was only a couple of hours north of the Twin Cities. I live around Minneapolis, and the lodge looked astonishing. All things considered, I shouldn't actually call it a lodge. It seemed to be an upscale house. It was planned in a cutting-edge style, however with a provincial and simple feel. Felt like I had struck gold. Since it wasn't exactly the high season anymore, it gets cold pretty right off the bat in northern Minnesota. It was really accessible at an appealing cost. However, it wasn't all luck that had enlivened my examination. I had actually been there with my family when I was a kid. I had affectionate recollections of the town as well. It was an enthusiastic, yet still exceptionally nearby spot. The decent proportion areas of strength for a local area that invited the Fairweather Lake Lodge proprietors. At any rate, that was my memory of it. For hell's sake, for the nature of this house and its value, I would have looked at half as 12 different towns that are genuinely horrendous, evaporated places. This is absolutely sufficient. I investigated the posting for around 10 minutes before I affirmed the booking, and made good my charge card number. I got an affirmation very quickly, as well as a decent mechanized note from the posting proprietor. Could tell that this was a professional vacation rental because of the few belongings that were displayed in the interior photos of the house. It was one of those, the keys to the spot are in this secret spot. If it's not too much trouble, set them back there and clean up before you leave sort of arrangements. Since my reservation was for that Friday, I figured I'd be prepared and could take the afternoon off that day to drive straight there from the office. I pressed the typical end of the week stuff, in addition to a few climbing stuff and some random setting up camp stuff into my dependable car. Before I wrapped up on Thursday night, I ensured I had all my crisis side of the road supplies. I'm not precisely a Judgment Day prepper, yet I really do comprehend that the forests are nature, and nature is capricious. The response, get ready. The drive up was peculiar. Was happy to avoid the standard Friday heavy traffic, yet zooming out of the urban areas so handily brought me into this odd half-rural, half-field climate inside an hour or so of takeoff. There's this sort of dull acknowledgement of innovation that is by all accounts unavoidable. I felt a disquiet all through this part of the drive. The inclination arrived at its peak when I passed an enemy of fetus removal bulletin emerging from a tree line, woodland on one or the other side. A powerful message to no one in an area where neither the message nor the structure that carries it belong. It was somewhat of an omen of these terrible towns I cruised by. Quite a few people of them appearing to stay alive by prudence of nearness to a significant throughway, as it were. Puts alive outwardly, yet empty at their center. This feeling was almost confirmed when we stopped for gas and groceries on a main street that was empty. An alcohol store was open, however, so I got a container of bourbon as well. The road was then returned, when my voyaging had taken me off the throughway and onto a fairly twisty province street, driving me to another, much twistier district street nearer to my objective. Things got, with way less individuals around. I felt like it was as of now not unsavory to turn my music far up. Even on a Friday, it was simple to pass the time on a road with only one lane and no other vehicles traveling in either direction. Invigorating as well. Once I was on this route, a few hours of driving really vanished, and it wasn't until early evening before I reached the town. It took somewhat longer than I remembered to get out there, yet I wouldn't fret. From each sign that I could gather as I showed up, the town of Dodenba was getting along nicely. There were merry individuals strolling about the central avenue, halting and talking with one another. Nobody looked as though they were in a narcotic daze, and the structures were all around kept up with. My pit stop and that billboard's decrepit, unsettling atmosphere vanished, and I was replaced by an infectious optimism. Boats were towed behind people returning from fishing at the nearby lake, or nicer, more recent automobiles were parked outside the few watering holes scattered throughout the small town center. My objective was on the opposite part of town, so I needed to pass directly through the principal drag to get to the little street that would take me to my lodge. The guide I was sent after I had affirmed my booking showed that the property was really neighboring a state nature save, which was extraordinary information to me. It was far away, but if I had brought a bicycle, I could probably ride it into town. I took in the sights as I drove slowly. I had a major moronic smile all over until my eyebrows collapsed themselves into a hard wrinkle. Right as I switched off the central avenue, I passed by an old shop that seemed as though it had a place in a spooky form of the sure from center earth than it did in a flourishing little town like this. It was a two-colored, one-story rambler with a gray, sunken porch in the front and ratty Confederate flags strewn throughout. The banners all alone were disturbing to see. However, this was simply good to beat all of a home. An open doorway that led into a dimly lit, eerie hallway was framed by the porch. It was open air and easily warm outside, at this point from the dark smoke overflowing out of a dry line stack on the rooftop. I could perceive a fire was going. The sign over the entryway read, Cassie's Corner Store, yet a sign on the entryway, open totally, expressed KEPAUT. Not the most inviting. Both earned and weirded out by the uncommon sight of hillbilly rubbish in a blue state, I moved along rapidly, based on the information I had received. Finding the cabin was not difficult. I showed up at the house and recovered the keys from the clearest counterfeit stone I'd at any point seen. The true unconcern for security here provided me with a liberating sensation. In the event that this exceptionally pleasant house could sit on this extremely decent slope while being truly helpless against any prowler, regardless stay immaculate, I'd presumably be acceptable for the end of the week. I entered through the front entryway, and was right away shocked by the sheer excellence of the spot. The light impeccably projected a blend of comfortable orange gleam over the prevalently wooden completions, with the differentiating shadows making perky examples on the floor. Furthermore, wall. I smiled to myself and put my things down to investigate. The fundamental entry opened up into a sort of hall, which prompted an extremely open kitchen and lounge area on the right. On the left was an open-to-front room, and by the left wall there were steps paving the way to several rooms and an office. This spot could undoubtedly house 5 to 10 individuals. However, it was all mine this time. I started to notice small details that showed an unexpectedly high level of craftsmanship as I toured the property. There were hand-cut moldings and custom woodwork all over. Nothing seemed, by all accounts, to be pre-created. In my adulthood, I had just leased lofts, modest ones from jerk landowners, typically, and just at any point had IKEA furniture. Encountering this lodge resembled being in an outsider land. I sat in one of the seats, and my body just liquefied into it. The solace of this seat was dumbfounding. An ideal fit. Whoever set up this house had given the greatest amount of consideration to everything about. I was thankful for it, kicking my major advantages over the hassock and absorbing it. It was so agreeable, as a matter of fact, that I became worried about nodding off. I anticipated that I would have ample time to explore the remainder of the cabin later that evening. For the time being, I truly needed to get a feeling of the encompassing area and the state nature safeguard, only noticeable in the patio. I could enter the state preserve by walking straight for the tree line from the back porch, according to a neatly arranged laminated property map on the kitchen counter. The way to that patio was straightforwardly behind the lounge area. As a result, all I had to do to see this path was look to my right from where I was standing in the kitchen. Through the delightfully outlined glass wall that the lounge area was settled into, I could see both the patio, the tree line, and a light way in the grass prompting it. Tossed on my climbing shoes, got the keys, my container of water, and a compass, and headed out the secondary passage. I took in the air as I trotted over the soft grass. It felt perfect. The sun was sparkling warmth on a generally cool and lively day. A boatload of pressure liquefied off my shoulders after even only a couple of steps. Understanding this, I pondered for what reason being in a spot like this gave me such a lot of help. Musingly, now that I had burnt through such a lot of energy getting over here, alone, I sort of wished I had somebody to stay with me. I certainly esteemed the isolation. However, it struck me when I understood that without precedent for some time, I needed another person to be near. It was somewhat of a decent difference in pace, mindset-wise. Thought about a couple of individuals I could have raised here. However, I questioned they could reproduce a similar mentality I was in. Perhaps it was the manner in which individuals on the Central Avenue I had gone through were associating with one another. Individuals from various phases of life, and sort of different for northern Minnesota, were coexisting with one another. This was a local area, and individuals thought often about one another over here. You could see it in the manner old structures were kept up with, very much like you could see it in how the more youthful occupants treated the old folks. I was pondering this pretty eagerly when I understood that I was totally encircled by trees. Kicked myself somewhat, and noted to myself that nobody realizes that I'm over here, and that losing all sense of direction in the forest inside 100 minutes of nightfall is an ill-conceived notion. I looked behind me, and could see the initial where I entered. About 50 feet away, it was. Actually look at my compass to see that the opening was squarely in the center of the south and southeast pointers. Presently, in the event that I got somewhat convoluted, I essentially knew whether I fundamentally traveled south I would be alright. Checked out the forest also. There were a lot of conifers and only a few shrubs in this older forest. This made for simple strolling in the daytime. It was astounding for me, nonetheless, how dull it was here from the covering. However, all of the daydreaming I had quite recently done assisted my eyes with changing. When I heard it, I was taking in everything and checking to see if there were any nice clearings or cool trees to look at. ****. As I turned my head toward the sound, I saw a shadowy figure dart through the trees. I worried a little as the sensation of being observed gradually crawled over me. In a situation like this, you always have to make an odd choice. Generally, this sort of occasion is good for nothing. Living creatures will generally stay in a state nature protect. In any case, being distant from everyone else in the forest means generally an opportunity of his being destroyed by a crazy killer with nobody truly knowing. I have observed that the best game plan is to attempt to affirm the pointlessness of the timberland sound without expanding weakness to crazy killers. In addition, the shadow and sound appeared to be at least 100 yards away. The only reason I heard it was because the woods are typically very quiet, and it was too far away to see. I strolled somewhat further along, calculating my head to get a superior view while keeping my ears open. Despite the fact that I continued letting myself know it was nothing, I could gradually feel my pulse expanding as the blood siphoned more earnestly in my ears. I thought back south, towards more prompt security, yet all at once continued to push ahead. Gradually, and with every stride, my anxiety and sensations of being watched expanded. ****. I heard one more sound followed by some stirring, this time a whole lot nearer than 100 yards away. Dark shadow dashed through certain bushes before me. My heart began dashing and my hips were at that point going to run when the shadow leapt out before me and handled its 4 grimy paws on a wrecked log only 5 feet from where I was standing. It was a canine. Medium-sized, dark, shaggy canine. I got it as a lab-cho blend at that point, and I don't think the speculation was distant. I moaned help and giggled to myself. The canine, gasping and grinning with its tongue out, positioned its head at a point considering what I was chuckling to myself about. Asked, bending over, "Hey buddy, where'd you come from?" Connected my hands, and accordingly it grunted to itself and raised up a bit. It sort of beat its little paws in the soil and gazed up. It yelped once at me then, at that point, turned and began to leave. It took a couple of steps prior to sitting on its hindquarters. Glancing back at me, "You maintain that I should follow you, huh?" said as I moved forward a little. The shaggy mutt again yelped only a single time, practically an endorsement, and proceeded with, I decided to follow him for a while because I could tell he was excited. Whoever's canine this was most likely realizes the forest well. Basically, I trusted. I didn't see a collar, yet the probability of a real wanderer having the option to make do here and be cheerful was low. Plus, this canine didn't appear to be lost at all. As we walked around, the dog truly began to get a move on. He was also not moving in a straight line. It appeared to be following its own path from memory, turning one way at a particular tree and the other at a rock covered in moss. To keep up, I started walking quickly, but soon I was just jogging to keep him in my sight. It didn't help that it was getting hazier constantly, and what I was following was a pure black furball. "Hey, doggy," I called out, yet it was presently running. I was close to an all-out run before I understood I was going through the forest pursuing what could be a wild creature like a crazy person. What in the world am I doing? I pondered internally as I dialed back to stop. I twisted around with my hands, kneeling down to pause and rest, and all I could hear was my own pulse and a weak stirring somewhere far off as the canine totally gotten away from me. Embracing a new lease on life following 15 minutes in the forest was not the ideal way I needed to begin my excursion. Still exhausted, I glanced around and saw that I was in a slight clearing. I didn't expect this shade of hazy amber to be cast by the sun streaming through the canopy here. It seemed as though I was toward the finish of a way. This was unusual. These state preserves typically had paths that either made a loop or reached a landmark. In most cases, paths didn't just end like this. Essentially, as far as anyone is concerned, they didn't. I knew that was a bad idea, but there was a small part of me that wanted to see where it went. I had currently sort of messed up by following that dog around here. In the event that I hadn't gotten my direction ahead of time, I could experience really been in some difficulty. Looking forward, the way didn't appear to truly lead anyplace but to more woodland. I concluded it very well may be something cool to investigate later, yet for the second I believed it best to attempt to head back. Actually look at my compass. From the blend of my own inward ability to know east from west and its perusing, I could perceive that I had taken a great deal of exciting bends in the road through this woods. My thought process would be south. Back the manner in which I came was west. The way was going in a northerly course, and to my east was the heading the canine had been running. I chose to head straightforwardly south to attempt to escape the forest as fast as could be expected. I thought I heard the dog once more, this time to my northeast, as I checked my compass and organized myself. Because I didn't want to get caught in a second wild dog chase, I ignored the rustling. Strolled at an energetic speed with the compass close by consistently, not having any desire to burn through any time. I figured I could wind up not precisely on a similar property as my lodge. Despite the town's apparent friendliness, nobody really likes strangers entering their property. The circumstance would be not difficult to make sense of, however, such a situation should be stayed away from. I wasn't worried, as I hadn't really meandered exceptionally far. I was strolling to try not to need to go through large bunches of trees, continually looking at my direction to ensure I was heading the correct way. I had bypassed an outcrop of birch when I understood I was going somewhat excessively far in a southeast heading. As I strolled and concentrated on the compass, neglected to see a thick root on the ground, and stumbled a little, tumbling down on my hands. Crap, I half mumbled, half yelled as I got myself and the compass. Better watch out. Behind me, a voice called, Jesus. I spun around to see an older man with a stick, wearing a golf player's cap, and wearing a wool and sweater vest, with freight cases and elastic mutter boots standing only a couple of feet away. Not exactly, he said as he grinned to himself, entertained at my alert. It probably seemed obvious to him that surprising an outsider in the forest is definitely not an extremely decent thing to do. Yet he likewise probably realized that he showed up totally innocuous. I'm sorry. Oh, I expressed, recuperating from my bewilderment. I got somewhat pivoted over here. I'm simply making a beeline for my lodge. I put the sentence out there, and it was by all accounts got by another stir a couple of feet away. I turned my head to look past the elderly person, yet he focused his eyes on me for a couple of moments. An odd second passed between us as the stirring drew nearer, and the dark canine rose up out of behind certain greeneries. The little scalawag had similar senseless smile all over as it surrounded around the man, loosened up, and afterwards sat on his rump alongside his proprietor. The elderly man reached down to scratch the dog behind his ear after recognizing my eyes. Seems as though you met Donnie, he told me. He didn't make you pursue him, did he? I wouldn't agree that he made me, I said with a little laugh, yet I guess you could call it that. Oh, well, that is his MO, okay. He grinned at the dog and said, we don't get too many people out here, and this guy loves people. You don't get many people here, I said, astounded. This was lovely nation, and I was unable to envision the lodge I was remaining at would experience the ill effects of an absence of tenants, particularly with the claimer I had recently found around. Well, we get a lot of individuals dropping by the neighborhood, and a lot of the lodge individuals have their companions out constantly on the lake. However, barely anybody comes to these woods. The vast majority are cautioned off when they get acquainted enough with the town to need to investigate it. He put this doubtlessly. Well, they're certainly passing up a great opportunity. Indeed, even the little disagreement I had with Donnie here was something truly amazing. Sure could do without getting turned around without anyone else. However, I surmise I wouldn't fret bringing the tourist debtor back home. Well, you realize how individuals are here and there. Various suppositions and such. His plain way of talking aroused my curiosity here, in a way that I didn't fully appreciate. What are superstitions, exactly? Oh, you're aware. Local stuff. Indian graveyard, and what have you. We're not excessively far away from a booking. A couple of people from the clan live here in the neighborhood, yet it's all discussion, for the most part individuals saying either occurred and they saw a soul or whatnot. I've lived right close to these woods for a really long time. It's every one of the a major heap of rubbish. However, I don't beat it down. More woodland for me. He gave me a wink and smiled. Gracious, the lodge I'm remaining at is right close to here as well. I really look at my compass, directly over in that heading. I motion toward the southwest. Oh, you should remain at Carrie's home. You're a fortunate person. We're nearby neighbors. On the off chance that you count 200 or 300 yards as nearby. He broadened his hand. I'm Al, this here's Donnie. I shook his hand, east to find a basic justification for this strange talking old folk to be over here. Good to meet you, Al. I'm Dan. Also, good to meet you, Donnie. The previous time, I let you control me. The canine grunted as I talked, turned all around, and plumped down once more. All things considered, to that end I was over here despite the fact that it's a piece late for the bramble. This protect was so close. Faked some friendly excitement. Well, you had a fair thought, yet you're off base around a certain something. I saw him, shocked again by how direct a northern Midwestern could be. Should accompany age. You're not exactly like that. And he ventured somewhat nearer to me. You're more like that. He motioned a couple of degrees contrast from where I had recently shown. You see that large tree just a little ways off of us. Gestured indeed. It was really unmistakable. You stroll to that tree and head straightforwardly southwest from that point. In a flash, you'll be back at that house. I gave the thumbs up. Hello, thanks so a lot. All. As a very remarkable sight as it is currently, I truly don't have any desire to be over here without a light anymore. Don't worry about it. And meeting you was great. In the event that I don't see you once more, I want to believe that you make some pleasant memories here in Donpa. Jerry's home is only a showstopper, as well, right? He said intentionally. Gestured an unequivocal yes. Again, please keep that youngster out of trouble right now. The dog gave me a wink and let out a half-barked farewell as I headed toward the tree. I had made a couple of strides when an inquiry seemed obvious me. Hello. Paul. I pivoted. Incredibly, he was all the while remaining there, totally unmoving, gazing at what used to be my back. Stopped for a couple of moments with a look of shock all over prior to acknowledging I was currently discourteously gazing at him. About 10 minutes north of here, I saw a path. Any thought where it goes or where it begins? Asked, wanting to gather a part of latest possible moment nearby information. He respected me briefly, with a weak articulation of uncertainty. The majority of this is a state preserve. None of the paths that lead to my property line are even a few miles away, and they are all clearly marked. On the off chance that you saw a way out there, it probably been made by the downpour or something different. In the event that you see it once more, I wouldn't go arranging a day around it or nothing. He left it at that. I sort of squinted at him for a couple of moments, attempting to handle two unintelligible thoughts in my mind. Okay, again, I appreciate the instructions. Enjoy your evening. I dismissed rapidly and strolled, attempting to overlook the needles in my back that I could feel his eyes shooting. Something different, he had said. That, and the notions he had referenced gave me a nauseous inclination that I didn't actually want to address right now. When I came to the large tree, I had decided to fail to remember the bizarre communication and simply partake in my end of the week. Checked my compass once more, and it was simple strolling toward the southwest. It just took me around 15 minutes to see the opening in the trees once more. At the point when I rose up out of the forest, I was a couple of yards from where I had entered. I felt like a lot had happened, despite the fact that it was only a brief excursion into the forest. I was prepared and anxious to kick back and loosen up in these sweet digs I had for the end of the week. I got into the house, removed my climbing boots, and sat back again in the cow-eyed seat. I let out a profound moan and shut my eyes briefly. The cow-eyed of the seat gave way to a practically drifting inclination. I woke to finish haziness with that dreadful sensation of having no clue about where I was. It took me one moment to collect myself. As I gasped in shock at my lack of surroundings, my first reaction was to grasp the chair's arms. With no light contamination in the encompassing region, awakening without any lights on implies awakening to finished darkness. When I felt the mind-blowing delicateness of the seat's arms, memory got back to me. Another relief sigh. Stayed there briefly, presently feeling rested. I felt senseless and excessively sketchy. In the woods, I talked to my nice elderly neighbor. Since I arrived, that was literally the only thing that happened to me. I got up cautiously and broadened my arms until I tracked down a wall. Quickly located and activated a light switch as I grasped the darkness. The family room illuminated, and was however exquisite and encouraging as it seemed to be in the daytime. I had long last seen the straightforward stone chimney on the contrary side of the wall, and gave careful consideration to give it a shot later. Actually look at the time, and amazingly it was after 12 p.m. Damn. I said out loud. The movement should have truly removed it from me. I got back from my walk around the forest around 6. It was astounding that I rested for such a long time. However, it probably been because of the calm of the climate. As I walked about, my stomach snarled. I was ravenous. I deserved a nice meal since I had only eaten lunch that day. Fortunately, I had a few essential food in a cooler pack with me. I circumvented the house and sorted out which lights related to the switches on the wall. At the point when I had set the right late evening cooking state of mind in the kitchen, I started up the stove. I pulled 2 steaks and a russet potato out of my cooler bag and placed them in a well-seasoned cast iron skillet I had found in a cupboard. I opened the packaging and placed the meat on a cutting board, seasoning the beef and letting it warm up while I prepared the potatoes. The meat was still pretty cool. As I was slicing the tubers up to bubble, I liked them crushed. I assumed I heard something outside, like the pat of hooves or something to that effect. Should be a deer, I contemplated internally, and continued to cut. I had placed a pot of water on the oven to keep the diced potatoes in, when I heard it once more. It had an unmistakable loping example to it, and seemed like a creature. However, it was really clearly, it should be a deer, I pondered internally. I put the cast iron on the oven and turned it high, pouring a little oil in to burn the steaks. I was too eager to even think about mindful, until I heard the snap click of hooves on the back deck. Turned to the right and heard the same hooves on wood sound as what looked like deer legs disappeared to the left of the glass wall. Remained there briefly, tuning in. I was unable to hear something else. Question crawled into my head, crawling along like a slug. Wasn't completely certain that what I had recently seen were deer legs. I assumed I had seen hooves, and I assumed I saw a leg. The leg, notwithstanding, looked white. The squeamish inclination crawled once again into my stomach. The anxious butterflies were flipping around as I strolled toward the lounge area to put lights onto the back deck. The entire porch lit up when I turned on the lights. Nothing existed there. I strolled over to the entryway and slid it open. Looking my head outside, I looked left and right. The sky was overcast, and there were no stars or the moon. The sensation of being washed returned. There was only cool air and obscurity. I yelled, "It's probably a deer," and it was. If you're feeling delusional, just saying something out loud can sometimes help. I shut and locked the way to the deck, yet left the light on. This day had been sufficiently bizarre, and the main thing that was holding me back from being drained again was the manner by which hungry I was. Chose to ensure the front entryway was as yet locked. The keys were securely in my pocket. I moved toward the entryway. However, fortunately, I could as of now see the deadbolt was gotten. For my own peace of mind, I wanted to make sure the doorknob was securely fastened. I went after the switch on the handle when I heard 3 boisterous thumps. Cans of ice supplanted my blood as a virus wave washed over me from my ears to the pit of my stomach and down to my toes. Couldn't move and was staring at the doorknob. A couple of moments passed in sheer fear as I thought about the closest thing I could use to safeguard myself. Nobody ought to thump on anybody's entryway in this sort of a spot during this season of night without a seriously valid justification. My bag was right next to the door, and the knife was on the cutting board. My hand was as yet a couple inches away from the door handle. I considered connecting further to completely lock it, when I heard the voice. "I'm help. Could you at any point please Lost. It seemed like a female voice, yet the words had neither rhyme nor reason. I have played this frozen memory over in my mind many times, and I'm certain this is what I heard. I didn't move or say anything. Although there was only a 15-second pause, a few hours passed. I heard 2 snap clicks on the stone external the entryway, and afterward another 3 thumps, gentler this time. Please, terrified. I'm so need lost. I'm help. It was somewhat more frantic this time, and, surprisingly, more counterintuitive. When this occasion rehashed the same thing, tad of clearness came to me. Hearing it the initial time, I assumed I was losing it. Presently, I knew 2 things. Whatever was on the opposite side of the entryway wasn't my companion, and I wasn't moving but to get a weapon. I would have rather not offered any hint that I could hear them, however, some way or another. Realized it could detect my presence, so I remained as still as could be expected, feeling my heart pound in my chest while doing whatever it takes not to hyperventilate. My eyes augmented as I heard more rattling of hooves on stone. It seemed like it had surrounded around itself, making 5 or 6 strides. The canine close to its proprietor from prior in the day streaked in my mind briefly. Another 3 knocks. Urgent. Harder than the initial time. Don't entryway. You can stress the open at this point. I began shuddering a little as I heard this. The voice was different. A moderately aged man's voice. Assuming that I needed to pee, I could have. My throat was completely dry, and I was vigorously considering going for the blade. From one viewpoint, this affirmed my doubt that what I was managing probably won't be human. Then again, it made me keep thinking about whether there was more than one of them. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to contemplate. The door jamb shook as the interloper beat on the entryway multiple times. I remained still, having the impression that I was free falling into the unending well of my own gut. No one but I can slice through the forest, you can't. As these sounds entered my ears, I let out a perceptible heave, then gagged on my own throat. It was a kid's voice, a young man. As I attempted to recuperate, it answered my tell by beating and scratching on the entryway, apparently attempting to hold any up it could now that it realized I was there. Tumbled to my knees in shock, simply gazing at the entryway with tears in my eyes like a bewildered nitwit. The entire house appeared to shake as the entryway was almost thrashed. All of a sudden, everything stopped. As it clattered away from the house, all I could hear was an endless series of brief screeches. I got a brief look at it through a side window as it ran away, the shrieking beating in my ears. In any case, it was exceptionally enormous. I was suspicious a blade would have helped me much in the event that it had traversed the entryway. Nevertheless, the shrieking proceeded. I was sure it probably been a supernatural substance to have the option to extend sound at such a distance, until I investigated at the kitchen and saw smoke surging out of the skillet on the oven. The smoke caution was going off. I moaned alleviation and nearly grinned to myself. I never anticipated that one should save me like that. I had been envisioning the specific place of the blade while remaining there in fear. However, my eyes had been locked on the entryway the whole time. I let the alert happen for quite a while, trusting it would keep that thing under control. I eliminated the dish from the intensity with a pot holder, obviously, and painstakingly poured more oil in the skillet to chill everything off. In the long run, I switched off the stove and the caution. I wasn't eager any longer. Turned on a roof fan and each light in the house. After that, I went back, locked the switch on the doorknob, and I locked every window I could find. Tracked down the main room with an internal swinging entryway, and put a seat from the lounge area in it. I pondered calling the police, yet I didn't have administration, and there was no landline or web in the house. What exactly would I say to them? I was completely gone ballistic, yet I realized I could unfortunately do a limited amount a lot. I made plans to leave at the break of day, regardless of whether it was only for some inn where less possibility of was being destroyed by some obscure, voice-changing, benefited animal of the evening. I kept the blade alongside me and remained in the room with the entryway cut by the seat. I didn't have a good sense of reassurance. However, I felt like I had depleted my choices for keeping up with well-being. In any case, in the event that it could overcome this, I most likely was never intended to make it. I brought a diary up here as well, to record all that occurred as it's new in my mind, and to put me to work as opposed to resting. I can't rest here realizing that thing is out there. As I said, I've replayed what occurred at that entryway multiple times in my mind. When I finally realized what had me so twisted up the last time I heard it speak, or whatever it was doing that sounded like human voices, around 3 a.m., I was close to falling asleep. You can't cut through the woods. Only I can. It was spoken by a child. It sounded from the beginning like it was an admonition, and I assumed I was hearing it since it had seen me before, intruding in its region. However, as I heard it for the 100th time in my mind, I understood I had experience with both the words and the voice. Somebody had expressed that to me previously.